For decades, Hollywood fans have speculated about the icy tension between two of the biggest stars of the golden era, Charles Bronson and James Garner. Both men were rugged, talented, and fiercely independent. Yet something happened behind the scenes that left them worlds apart. While Garner was known for his easygoing charm and quiet strength, Bronson carried an intensity that could silence a room. The two icons crossed paths more than once, and though they shared mutual respect on screen, behind closed doors, the story was far more complicated. Now, years after both legends have stepped away from the spotlight, a long-buried truth has finally come to light. In a rare resurfaced interview, Charles Bronson, a man of few words, opened up about his real thoughts on James Garner. What he said not only shocked fans, but also revealed the deep emotional divide that existed between them. Rumors have always surrounded the two, stories of clashing egos, creative differences, and even personal grudges. But the truth, as Bronson finally confessed, was something far more personal. It wasn't just about Hollywood rivalry. It was about trust, loyalty, and a moment in their careers that neither man ever truly recovered from. When Charles Bronson finally broke his silence, he didn't hold back. His words painted a portrait of two men shaped by war, fame, and a film industry that often pitted friends against each other. What started as professional respect had turned into quiet resentment, and what Bronson revealed would make even Garner's closest friends see their relationship in a new light. Stay with us, because once you hear what Charles Bronson finally said about James Garner, you'll understand why this story has remained buried for so long. In the world of classic Hollywood, few actors commanded the screen quite like Charles Bronson and James Garner. Both men came from humble beginnings, both served their country, and both clawed their way up from supporting roles to become household names. Yet, despite their similarities, their personalities could not have been more different, and it was that very contrast that set the stage for one of the most fascinating behind-the-scenes stories in film history. Charles Bronson was a man forged in hardship. Born into poverty in Pennsylvania, he worked in the coal mines as a child, and later served in World War II before ever stepping foot in Hollywood. That background gave him a quiet toughness that audiences felt in every performance, the kind of intensity you can't fake. On the other hand, James Garner, born in Oklahoma, had a natural charm and effortless charisma. Where Bronson was reserved, Garner was open and friendly. Where Bronson's eyes burned with mystery, Garner's smile disarmed even the toughest critics. Their paths first crossed in the late 1950s, during the golden age of westerns, a genre both men would come to dominate. Garner was already turning heads as Brett Maverick in Maverick, the witty, gun-slinging gambler who relied on brains more than bullets. Bronson, meanwhile, was building his reputation as a no-nonsense, steel-eyed supporting actor in gritty films like Machine Gun Kelly and The Magnificent Seven. It was during this era that the two actors' professional respect began. But it didn't take long for admiration to turn into quiet rivalry. Behind the camera, insiders described their dynamic as uncomfortable. Garner, known for his humor and approachability, often tried to break the ice on set. But Bronson wasn't one for small talk. He didn't like pretense or Hollywood games, one crew member later recalled. Garner joked. Bronson glared. That was the routine. As the 1960s rolled in, both stars were cast in The Great Escape, the World War II epic that brought together some of the biggest names in Hollywood. It was here that the subtle tension between Bronson and Garner truly surfaced. While the ensemble cast, including Steve McQueen, Richard Attenborough, and James Coburn, bonded during filming, Bronson kept mostly to himself. Garner, ever the peacemaker, tried to include him in conversations, but Bronson's responses were curt. Some said it was just his nature. Others believed there was something deeper, perhaps a feeling that Garner's charm came too easily in an industry Bronson had to fight to survive. Their performances in The Great Escape were both memorable, Garner's intelligence and quiet courage, balanced by Bronson's raw emotional depth. Yet, when the film became a massive success, rumors began swirling that Bronson felt overshadowed. Garner's natural ease in interviews and his friendly public image drew most of the attention, while Bronson remained the tough guy who rarely smiled. One Hollywood reporter from the era described Bronson as a man who lived inside his silence. He wasn't rude, just private, protective of his emotions. To Garner, that silence was confusing. You never knew if he liked you or wanted to throw you through a wall, Garner reportedly joked years later. But what many didn't know was that beneath Bronson's quiet exterior was a man who deeply respected Garner's talent, even if he never said it aloud. After The Great Escape, their careers took different paths. Garner continued to charm audiences in films like The Americanization of Emily and Grand Prix, while Bronson became an international icon with Once Upon a Time in the West and the Death Wish series. They rarely crossed paths again, but their brief encounters were always marked by the same silent tension. Mutual respect, clouded by years of unspoken words. It wasn't until many years later, in a rare and reflective interview, that Charles Bronson was asked about his time working with James Garner. For the first time, he didn't dodge the question. What he revealed next, about his true feelings toward Garner, the hidden friction between them, and the painful moment that defined their relationship, would leave fans stunned. Because when Bronson finally spoke, his honesty cut through decades of silence, and the truth wasn't what anyone expected. When The Great Escape premiered in 1963, it was hailed as one of the greatest war films ever made. A triumph of storytelling, ensemble acting, and heroic spirit. Audiences adored the characters, from Steve McQueen's rebellious Cooler King to James Garner's clever Scrounger and Charles Bronson's haunted Tunnel King. But behind the camera, quiet tension simmered between Bronson and Garner, a professional rivalry that neither man ever fully acknowledged, yet one that shaped both their careers for years to come. Bronson was not the type to engage in Hollywood politics or small talk. He worked, he delivered, and he left. James Garner, on the other hand, was naturally social. He laughed with the crew, told stories, and always made people feel at ease. Their vastly different temperaments made them admire, yet quietly resent, each other. Those who worked on The Great Escape later recalled how Bronson often kept to himself, focusing on his lines and his character. He'd stand off to the side, silently observing everything. Garner, always the diplomat, tried to connect, often cracking jokes during breaks. Charlie wasn't a bad guy, Garner once said. He just didn't see the need to pretend. That subtle remark, though likely harmless, reflected how Garner saw Bronson as someone detached, almost cold. What Garner didn't realize was that Bronson's silence wasn't arrogance. It was protection. Years of hardship had taught him to trust no one easily. Hollywood, with its fake smiles and hidden agendas, was a place he approached like a battlefield. Garner's easy charm, though genuine, reminded Bronson of everything he wasn't, and that quiet comparison gnawed at him. According to an assistant director on The Great Escape, one particular day on set summed up their relationship perfectly. During a break in filming, Garner invited several cast members to join him for dinner. When he asked Bronson, the actor simply said, "I don't mix work with talk." Garner laughed it off, but the message was clear. Bronson drew boundaries that no one was allowed to cross. As the years passed, the distance between them grew. Garner became a beloved figure in both film and television, starring in The Rockford Files, where his down-to-earth personality won him a new generation of fans. Bronson, meanwhile, built an entirely different legacy, one of grit, vengeance, and moral complexity. His roles in Death Wish, Mr. Majestic, and Hard Times turned him into a global symbol of justice and raw masculinity. Yet, despite his fame, something about the way Hollywood celebrated others always bothered Bronson. He often said in interviews that he didn't care about awards or attention, but those close to him saw the quiet frustration beneath the surface. He respected Garner, one former colleague said, but he also envied the way people loved him so easily. Bronson had to earn that love through every performance. For Garner, the feeling was different. In his memoir, he once mentioned that Bronson was a man who never let his guard down, not even for a second. He admitted he wished they could have been closer, that perhaps they might have found common ground if either had taken the first step. But the two men were products of a generation that didn't talk about feelings, and pride often stood in the way of connection. The unspoken feud between them wasn't marked by anger or betrayal. It was built on misunderstanding. Garner represented light, Bronson shadow. One embodied warmth and humor, the other quiet resilience. Together, they symbolized two sides of the same coin, strength forged by experience, but expressed in completely different ways. Years later, when Bronson was asked about Garner in an interview that resurfaced long after his death, his response stunned fans. Garner was the kind of man Hollywood liked, he said. But I liked him too, even when I didn't show it. Their paths never fully crossed again, but the legacy of that silent feud became part of Hollywood legend. A reminder that sometimes even the toughest men carry unspoken admiration for those who walk a different path. It was late in his life when Charles Bronson finally decided to speak about James Garner, not during the height of their fame, not amid the rumors of rivalry, but quietly, in reflection. By then, Bronson had retreated from the spotlight. He was older, slower, and, for once, more open to revisiting the past. During a rare interview in the late 1990s, when asked about The Great Escape and his co-stars, Bronson paused for a long moment before answering. What followed was perhaps the most revealing statement of his entire career. "You know," he said, "Garner was one of the good ones. Hollywood had a lot of faces, but his was real. I didn't always show it, but I respected that man." That simple admission carried the weight of decades of silence. For years, people believed Bronson harbored resentment toward Garner, that he saw him as a rival or even an opponent. But in truth, what lay beneath the surface was admiration mixed with frustration. Bronson respected Garner's effortless grace, the way he could be both commanding and approachable. But for a man who had lived through war, poverty, and loss, ease never came naturally. Bronson went on to explain that his distance on set wasn't personal. "I wasn't trying to be difficult," he said. "That was just me. I didn't talk much. James, he talked for both of us." The room reportedly chuckled, but Bronson didn't smile. He looked down and added quietly, "He made people feel good. I didn't know how to do that." It was a rare moment of vulnerability from a man whose image had always been carved from stone, and it revealed what had always existed between the two men, mutual respect shadowed by emotional distance. Bronson had never hated Garner. He envied, perhaps, the simplicity with which Garner moved through the world. His charm, his openness, his ability to laugh easily. But hate? Never. When Garner was later shown Bronson's remarks during an interview of his own, his response was as genuine as ever. "Charlie was one of a kind," Garner said softly. "He didn't say much, but when he did, he meant it." That was his way of showing respect. Garner even admitted that he, too, misread Bronson's quiet demeanor. "I used to think he just didn't like me," he confessed. "But looking back, I think he was just a man who carried too much on his shoulders. And I get that. In many ways, both men were reflections of the times they came from. The post-war generation of actors carried an emotional armor that rarely cracked. Feelings were seen as weakness, and silence was strength. Both Bronson and Garner embodied those values, one through stoic power, the other through calm composure. But Bronson's final words about Garner, shared in that rare interview, painted a different picture. He recalled one moment on The Great Escape that had stayed with him for decades. A day when the set was tense after a long shoot. Bronson, exhausted and withdrawn, had been struggling with a scene. Garner quietly walked over and, without saying much, handed him a cup of coffee. "No advice, no jokes," Bronson said. "Just that small gesture. That's the kind of man he was." It wasn't until years later that Bronson realized how much that simple act had meant to him. "I didn't thank him then," he admitted. "But I remembered." That single memory captured the essence of their relationship. Two men too proud to speak their admiration, yet bound by a quiet understanding that only those who've fought their own battles can share. When Charles Bronson passed away in 2003, tributes poured in from across the film industry. Among them was a heartfelt message from James Garner, who simply said, "He was tough, he was real, and he never played a false note." Garner never mentioned their rumored feud. Instead, he honored the truth that beneath the silence there was always respect. In the end, both men left behind legacies defined not by conflict, but by character. Their story wasn't about rivalry. It was about two icons who, in their own ways, represented integrity, hard work, and authenticity in a world that often rewards the opposite. And when Charles Bronson finally broke his silence, he gave fans something rare. A glimpse into the heart of a man who, for most of his life, never let the world see beyond his stare. Time has a way of softening old stories, washing away the tension and leaving behind only the truth. For Charles Bronson and James Garner, that truth is one of mutual respect, quiet strength, and timeless legacy. Though decades have passed since their heyday, both men continue to stand as symbols of an era when Hollywood stars didn't need flash or scandal to command attention. Only authenticity. Charles Bronson's name became synonymous with intensity. His performances in Death Wish, Hard Times, and Once Upon a Time in the West still captivate audiences around the world. He was the embodiment of raw masculinity, a man who didn't need words to express emotion. His silence spoke louder than most actors' speeches. To this day, younger actors cite Bronson as an influence, admiring how he could make vulnerability and strength exist in the same frame. James Garner, on the other hand, left behind a legacy of warmth and wit. From Maverick to the Rockford Files and Murphy's Romance, he made every role feel human, believable, and full of heart. Garner represented the everyman, confident but never arrogant, tough but always kind. His performances reminded people that courage could also be gentle. Together, they represented two sides of Hollywood's golden masculinity, the silent fighter and the charming thinker. And though they may have walked different paths, their influence continues to shape generations of performers who came after them. Film historians often look back on The Great Escape as a symbolic meeting point between these two forces. It was the rare film where two completely opposite personalities collided, and, in doing so, created something unforgettable. The tension that existed between Bronson and Garner on set, that silent understanding that neither would ever say aloud, added layers to their performances. The result was cinematic history. After both men passed, Garner in 2014, Bronson in 2003, fans began to re-examine their connection. Old interviews resurfaced, stories from crew members were retold, and the so-called feud that once fascinated Hollywood was revealed for what it truly was. Two men who misunderstood each other, yet admired one another deeply. One of Garner's close friends once said, "Jimmy always had a soft spot for Charlie. He used to say that behind those serious eyes was a good man who just didn't know how to show it." That sentiment was echoed by those who knew Bronson best. He didn't talk about people much, a friend recalled. But when he did, you could tell it mattered. Garner mattered. Their legacy also serves as a reminder of what Hollywood once was, a place where stars earned respect through talent and work ethic, not headlines. Both men came from working-class roots, both served in the military, and both carried the scars of real life into their performances. They weren't acting tough, they were tough, and that authenticity is what made audiences believe every word, every look, and every silent moment. In recent years, tributes and documentaries have revisited their stories, often side by side. Younger viewers discovering The Great Escape for the first time see not just two actors, but two philosophies of life. One reserved and watchful, the other open and inviting. Together, they remind us that greatness doesn't always need friendship or harmony. Sometimes it's born from quiet contrast. As one critic beautifully summarized, Garner made you smile, Bronson made you think. Together, they made you feel. In the end, Charles Bronson's final words about James Garner remain the most fitting conclusion to their story. He was one of the real ones. Coming from a man as guarded as Bronson, that single line spoke volumes. It was respect, acknowledgement, and closure all in one breath. Both men are gone now, but their spirits endure. In the faces of modern actors who strive for honesty in their craft, in the fans who still revisit their films, and in the lessons they left behind about humility, resilience, and integrity. Because when Charles Bronson finally broke his silence on James Garner, he didn't just settle an old Hollywood mystery. He reminded the world that even the toughest hearts carry admiration, and that true greatness, in the end, always recognizes its equal.